Hey everybody, this is Jason Sturm from The Edge Pro. We're going to talk a little bit today about another way to make money with our flat hones. What we're going to talk about today is using our flat hone to sharpen knives. There's many of you, I'm sure, that are sharpening knives already or have looked into it. There's all kinds of equipment out there that you can use, but we want to keep it simple today, and many of you already own this equipment. So how can we make us some more money while we're out working? Knives in general, we're going to cover some basics of what we expect that creates a sharp knife. Lots of thoughts out there. Again, many ways to get from A to Z on knife sharpening or the process. Got my board over here, and I'm going to start just to look down here at the bottom. I've got some pictures of 3 different profiles. When we're doing knife sharpening, there's 3 different conventional thoughts of how to get that cutting edge. One would be a hollow grind, where we come in and you actually dip out some of the metal beyond the cutting edge. And of course this is exaggerated so we could see it. And then we come into our refined cutting edge. The next would be more of a convexing, where we have an outward bow to that final edge down to the tip. And then we have something more of a flat line that we would see. And this is what we'd maybe see traditionally in a lot of cutlery going into restaurants for line cooks, things like that. Well, we've determined in our experience, we've only done this for about 30 years, is that convexing of that edge actually gives more support and strength and structure to the cutting edge, especially when you're talking about the home chef or the hunter fisherman and their knives, or even the pocket knife that is getting pulled out and maybe get abused now and then. So having that outward bow is actually our favorite way to get a cutting edge with a knife. All these are going to create a sharp knife. It's what we want to talk about now is, even the durability. How long will that edge last? And so that convexing actually helps us in the support and structure of the cutting edge itself. What is a cutting edge? How do we get there? That's going to be the next thing. Because what happens is we get a knife that comes in, and again, you're going to see my wonderful artwork here. Oh, look at that. I got a perfect marker. We'll switch that out. So we've got our knife, we've got a spine, and we typically have some level of curvature, and somewhere in there we're going to have a handle that comes back to hang on to it. Nice knife, isn't it? So when we come in to sharpen this, usually it's because there's nicks and damage or just a rolled over edge where we have a burr that's been caused because the edge itself was fragile and they've come down on a stainless steel surface or countertop, glass cutting board, lots of different things that they may have done. And we're going to have to remove some metal to get back to a new cutting edge. So if we look at that profile a little differently and we kind of do a cross section of the blade, we come out here and we've got our damage that's going to cut down. We've got nicks, we've got rolled over kind of thickened areas, things like that. We're going to come in and we have to actually remove some metal back up into the shoulder of that knife coming across. And what happens when we do that is we will, once we've crossed what we're going to call the vector point or the 0 point of the edge, which is that point right where everything crosses, right out here, it's going to actually push up a burr. And those of you that are sharpening scissors, you've seen burrs, you've had to remove burrs, and that's what we're going to do on the knife. And so that burr is actually going to translate all the way down that cutting edge if we have universally created that new burr. Once we have a burr that's coming up onto the edge, we're going to transfer to the second side of the knife and work on our abrasives here, which will then move the burr back to the second side. Once we have a burr that can flip direction back and forth one side to the other, we have underneath it a very new, sharp, clean cutting edge. Especially if we've taken off enough material, of course, to get past any damage that they may have caused. Once we're there, and we, again, we'll kind of start fresh here. We have this, we've created a burr. That burr then gets flipped back to the second side, over here. Now we're going to have to refine that. So we started out maybe with a more aggressive abrasive. We're going to work through some steps. In our shop, we usually don't have to go much more than about 120 grit, somewhere in that range, and then we will finish all the way to about a 380. before we go to a polishing pad and rouge and end up with a nice refined edge. But as we refine, we keep coming out, and that burr will get smaller, and then eventually we're going to come in and polish it away to where we expose the new cutting edge underneath. So that's kind of our method of madness. Now let's see how we would do that actually in physical terms on our flat hone. So we're going to come over here. This is kind of a fun machine. This actually was a scissor machine my dad first started with back in 1989. It's now retired away from doing scissors much, and we dedicate it just to knives. So this is actually how we finish knives every day. This is 120 grit. We're going to take a basic kitchen knife, and we're going to start to create a new edge for it. This machine is directional, so we can go clockwise and counterclockwise with it. And so we want to just start out either direction, left or right-handed. One of the things that we will talk about a little bit is angle. We do most of our knives anywhere from 18 to 22 degrees. You would say, well, what's the difference, from a fillet knife to a cleaver? Well, obviously a cleaver, we need a little more durability in what we're doing, but a fillet knife, we need a little more finesse. We want that to razor through the flesh that we're trying to do or take that skin off. But another correlation, let's say I did both of those at 22 degrees. They're both going to cut differently because a cleaver has a very thick, heavy blade, and so our angle actually creates a stouter edge there. But when we have a very thin blade, like a fillet knife that's flexible and thin, that same angle actually will razor through more cleanly. But we will typically drop our angle closer to that 17, 18 degrees when we're working on a fillet knife, and we'll be up to that 22 by the time we get to that cleaver or even a general chef knife. So when we come in, I've got this going clockwise. Notice I'm going to touch the machine a lot. I'm going to touch my abrasive because I want to know which direction that wheel is going. There are some machines out there that do have indicator lights that when we're in reverse, it tells us we're going the other way. But without that, I don't want to lay this down when the abrasive is coming toward my cutting edge, because it will grab into the abrasive in a lot of cases and throw the knife. Now, I have to find the knife. So we don't want to have that problem. So we're going to touch it. We're just going to always be aware of the direction of our wheel. But I'm going to lay this in. We're going to do this around 18 degrees. And you could say, well, how do I find 18 degrees? That's a great question. Here's 0. That's the angle we're going to work from to start with. There's 90, right? So if we point that to the camera, 0, 90, 45, 22 and a half, oh, there's about 18 degrees. So does this have to be an exact 18 degrees? Does it need to be an exact 22? I've never gotten that fussy, and we have extremely happy customers. And so I don't think you have to get too anal about that particular. If it is something you're very concerned with, obviously there are gauges out there, and we can get those. The other thing that we have with this pad is that this has actually got a cushion underneath it. So when I apply this to our abrasive, it actually will flex with me. I don't know if you can see this or not, but it has some cushion to it. And it actually will indent, which is giving us that convexing of that outer edge, just naturally by the cushion of the abrasive underneath us. But I'm going to come in, I'm going to start removing metal. I'm working down the cutting edge, and then as I get to the tip, I'm going to lift and rotate my wrist. That way I maintain the same angle all the way to the cutting tip. Now, as we go, it's kind of hard to see in the light, but possibly you can see the burr that has now come up along the entire cutting edge. It'll be indicated with a little shinier reflection of the light as we tip in there. Okay. Once we have a burr, as I mentioned in the drawing before, is we're going to reverse the machine. We're going to check which way it goes, and we're going to come up and we're going to flip that burr to the second side. The other information that's involved with our knife is the line length. Line length is the length from our cutting edge to the shoulder of where our abrasive is cutting. So when we are creating our burr, we don't want to get imbalanced with our knife. When I used to do knives for floor laying, kind of like this hook knife here, we actually created lefts, rights, and straights. So when we're cutting flooring, by broadening one angle and shortening the other, we would be able to follow a curve to the right, the left, or if we have them balanced, we can go straight. So when we're coming into our knives for the kitchen, the chef, hunting and fishing and whatnot, we tend to try to stay straight. That way we're balanced our angle, so that when they're in that nice prime rib and they're trying to get nice little strips off, they're not jumping out of the meat all the time. They're following it, or they're in the vegetable and they're trying to make nice decorations. Everything's even. So we came on our second side. Notice again, I'm checking my direction. I have my burr that's flipped over onto side 2. I'm looking at my line length on both sides. I'm fairly balanced right now, so I don't really need to concentrate on that more. But this is 120 grit, and I'm going to go ahead and step down. We don't want to step down too far, too fast, but I'm going to use side 1, and quickly my burr, if I've matched my angle, will flip up within a pass or two. I'm going to stop it. Apologize too, my brake is not working on my machine right now, so I have to help it stop. So I'm on side 2, and I'm again refining my edge to 180 grit. My burr flipped. I'm going to transfer down now to 220. Come across. My pads are actually getting a little softer as I go to give us a little more convexing and to blend my bevel that I've created across my knife edge to where it now blends into the rest of the blade nicely. My final grit, again, we're at 380. Again, I'm going to bring up my first burr. Just watching it. Now we have a nice clean solid burr. We're going to reverse. We'll get side 2. That burr instantly kicks right up on there, nice and shiny, solid everywhere. There's no damage. We have a very refined surface now, and our burr connection is very thin. These are leather pads. We actually make these pads. They're about a 9-pound, I believe it is, leather. We have them cut. These are 6 1/4 inch discs, so they overhang the edge. And the reason we do that is now we won't accidentally touch the metal with our newly refined edge. I've got rouge on here. There's lots of different rouges out there. Here it is, hiding in the back. This happens to be the Akami Gold rouge from Wolf Industries that we use most every day. It'll melt into our leather. And now I'm going to come up and flip that burr and start to remove it. As the rouge gets warm, along with the leather that's conditioned with it, it will be sticky and help pull that burr free. We did side 1, we're going to come back to side 2. You may even see some of that burr fly away. About 80% of our burr is gone now. A little bit was being stubborn and is still stuck, so I'm going to go back to side 1. And again, the burr and that edge is being refined each time we come in. This is our what we'll call burr removal, or it's also historically what we'd call stropping. And there is now our burr is removed. I'm just going to grab a towel here. I'm always working into the cutting edge, pulling away from that cutting edge, never pushing toward it, and never really sliding on it. At that point, we have a nice new clean edge. We have a very refined, polished cutting edge. And if we take, this is some craft paper, we should be able to come in and have a nice clean cut to that edge. And again, another good use for our flat hone.